Oreshnik.
Oreshnik. Early this morning, Russia carried out an attack with the Doomsday missile, the hypersonic Oreshnik missile. Although the attack, according to Russian authorities, was in response to last week's Ukrainian strikes against President Vladimir Putin's residence, in reality, it is clearly a direct message from Russia to none other than Donald Trump, following the US attack on Venezuela after the kidnapping of its president Nicolás Maduro and the capture of a Russian oil tanker by US armed forces a few days ago. Russia is finally responding. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. From Berlin, Germany, we begin broadcast number 318 of Demolishing Myths Talks. Thank you very much for joining us, and please remember to help us out with a like against censorship. From Madrid, Spain, we are joined by Mr. Juan Antonio Aguilar. Juan Antonio, how are things over there?
Señor Juan Antonio Aguilar. Juan Antonio, ¿qué tal todo por ahí?
Muy bien.
All right, here, resisting the European Union.
Juan Antonio,
the 9th day of the year. We predicted a heated start, but we were actually far too moderate in our forecasts, because the year began with major conflicts, tensions, and geopolitical escalations. And the big news, yesterday's Oreshnik missile attack, or an Oreshnik missile, on a gas storage facility, the largest in Europe, in the city of Lviv. Juan Antonio, how should we interpret what happened?
Juan Antonio, ¿qué lectura debemos realizar de lo sucedido?
Bueno, a ver, hay que añadir que...
Well, let's see. We should add that it's been exactly 1 year since Donald Trump took office. So right, we've already seen it. In 1 year, we've seen what the man is capable of. In that time, he's managed to attack 6 countries. The man of peace, the one supposedly deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize, hasn't missed a chance to start wars. We're dealing with a figure who logically has turned everything upside down when it comes to global geopolitics. There's an explanation for it, a rational one. Although the man himself, well, we'd have to refer to that report from the American Psychiatric Association, signed by 230 psychiatrists, which clearly diagnosed him with a narcissistic personality disorder.
En el cual le diagnosticaban claramente un trastorno narcisista de personalidad. Es decir, estamos en manos de un loco. Un loco rodeado por una banda.
We're in the hands of a madman surrounded by a criminal gang, the Narco Rubios, the Scott Bessons, the Peter Hessids, and that whole bunch. A madman surrounded by a criminal gang. The madman, being a narcissist, will only listen to those who whisper in his ear what he wants to hear, because he's great, wonderful, leading the greatest country in the galaxy, the most powerful army in the universe, and so on. A mental case. This is a warning. If they want to understand it, all that gang of fools, traitors, and sellouts who keep betting on Trump. I'm saying this mainly in America. From now on, you know, when I say America, I mean South America.
A partir de ahora, ya saben, cuando me refiero a América del Sur. América del Norte no es América.
North America is not America. I mean, when it comes to America and Europe, I think that in other parts of the world, in Africa or Asia, they have a very clear idea of what this idiot is. The issue, well, with that background of the first 11 months of Mr. Trump's first year, he began his second year the way he had to, by organizing wars and an escalation of tension that puts us all in a dangerous, very dangerous situation. In fact, every day I watch the news, I become more and more pessimistic. And let me explain, we've talked about it here before, even on other channels.
Alguna vez lo hemos hablado aquí, incluso en otros canales. Es decir, cuando una potencia hegemónica...
That is to say, when a hegemonic power finds itself confronted by emerging powers, it has 3 paths. One is to continue its decline until it ceases to be a power, which can lead to a collapse, an internal collapse, that could happen in the United States. Because we can already see how the streets react to any circumstance that arises, how protests, demonstrations, and so on immediately erupt, and it still lives off the dollar printing machine and off robbing the entire world. The day that can no longer happen, we'll see the streets burn in the United States and how that country ends.
Vamos a ver cómo arde la calle en Estados Unidos y cómo acaba ese país. Para evitar ese colapso,
To avoid that collapse, because of course that's not a good path, there's another route, the one I rationally expected could be taken, adapting precisely to that new multipolar order that's emerging. And then, well, yes, it would try to take a seat in that order with a dominant, highly important position as a great superpower, the largest military superpower and all that, but sharing in what should be that new multipolar order. This would be the path of adaptation, and it's the one that, rationally, any actor objectively analyzing the global situation would choose. The third path was to try by any means to maintain global hegemony, and that leads us to the Thucydides trap. While this was still unclear, everyone thought, well, we might be heading toward a tripolar world, more or less dominated by the United States, China, and Russia. Maybe later other emerging countries could be added as well, especially India, and also Japan or Brazil. But what we're seeing is that there won't be a multipolar order like that. If the United States is heading toward the Thucydides trap, it will try to maintain its hegemony as it has through war. Therefore, to increase their relative power, the rest of the countries will have to begin a process of rapprochement, of alliance, military alliance, in order to confront it. And this leads us to world war. This is the great danger, and it's what we're seeing. And then there's what happened in Venezuela, with the clear intention of pushing China out. None of this is a surprise. We analyzed it in the National Security Strategy document signed by Trump last November.
Firmado por Trump en el pasado mes de noviembre. O sea, a nadie de cogerle esto de sorpresa.
I mean, this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. I know there are plenty of idiots in the Western media garbage machine telling people a bunch of nonsense, but this is perfectly clear. We knew this could happen. Sure, he hasn't dared to invade Venezuela, but the threat of a bombing campaign that would destroy the country has led to this situation. But of course, what can Venezuela do on its own? That's why I say that the rest of the world, if it wants to try to protect itself from the actions of this madman surrounded by that gang of criminals, has only one option left: to unite, to come together, to join forces. There's no other way. But this man doesn't stop at Venezuela, does he? He threatens Colombia, threatens Mexico, threatens Cuba, threatens Nicaragua, and threatens anyone who stands in his way, because he's insane. Surrounded by a gang of criminals, and on top of that he's threatened Greenland. Greenland is Danish national territory and a NATO country. Look, they asked Trump a question in a Fox interview, right? They say to him, if you had to choose between Greenland or NATO, it's obvious which one he wants: Greenland. And NATO is dead. It's already like a zombie waiting for someone to sign its death certificate. That's the reality. And besides, they're seizing ships as if they were a band of privateers across all the seas in international waters. It's not that they stopped a ship near the U.S. coast. No. In international waters. They spent more than 20 days chasing an oil tanker until they caught it up north between the British Isles and Iceland. In yet another act of, well, some overly pedantic legal experts might say, no, it's not exactly piracy. Well, come on, idiots, that part. It's an act of piracy, an act of bandits, of highway robbers, only at sea. It's true there are some doubts about, well, was the ship Russian, wasn't it? Did they change the flag halfway through? You know, that sort of thing. It's true the crew wasn't Russian. There were only 2 Russians. The rest were Ukrainians. Almost the entire crew was Ukrainian. They're all detained in the United States, except for the 2 Russians whom Trump released. Of course, why? Because there must have been calls from Moscow. You're going to release our Russian citizens.
Right behind us, the images published today by the US Southern Command of this capture. The ship, in the end, was formally flying the flag of Lesotho. I don't remember exactly which country.
Today's one, yes. Yes, today's one. They're going to keep pirating and stealing oil. Why? Because Trump thinks Venezuela's oil belongs to him. Obviously, the Russian tanker wasn't carrying oil to Russia. It doesn't need any. It wasn't carrying Russian oil to Venezuela either. It doesn't need it. In other words, it was a ship taking oil to China. And since Trump's goal is to drive China out of the hemisphere, that's why he acts that way, right? Well, he acts like a looter, like a stagecoach robber, doesn't he? Typical of that country, right? I mean, who are we kidding? Hollywood has shown us the European circus in the United States. The thing is, people misunderstood it. Well, the assault.
Then
it's also clear that the CIA, either alone or with others, has been behind the drone attack on one of the Kremlin's presidential residences. It's an attack on Vladimir Putin's residence. I mean, Trump can deny whatever he wants. He can say that attack never happened. But Russia has the guidance systems of those drones and has been able to verify it perfectly. So Trump, being a pathological liar, spends his time lying constantly, deceiving everyone. In other words, typical behavior for a New York mobster back when he was a real estate developer. I imagine he went around deceiving everyone, which is also quite common in that profession. It's nothing unusual. And as I said, the ships, the attack on the presidential residence, the issue of Venezuela. Naturally, in the end, Russia had to respond. And it has responded with a more premeditated attack, because these things are planned in advance on Ukraine's energy and transport infrastructure. Only this time it was accompanied by an avant-garde missile. The avant-garde missile only makes sense to use if you're going to target underground structures deep below the surface. We know that in that area there was a bunker where high-ranking officers were located, both from the Ukrainian army and from NATO and the United States. There was also the large Ukrainian gas storage facility, the biggest in Europe, with 17.7 billion cubic meters. We don't know what damage has been done. What we do know is that there have been gas outages, so clearly it can't have ended very well. And an airbase where the F-16s were stationed has also been attacked. Of course, we still don't know, neither from information provided by the Russian defense minister nor from Ukrainian sources. Some Ukrainian data have been leaked, the real extent of the damage. But the warning has been given. The warning has been given because it fell very close to the Polish border, very close to that large NATO base that serves as the logistical hub through which Western weapons, ammunition, and so on reach Ukrainian troops. So the warning has been given. In fact, the Poles were very concerned because it fell very close to them. One more minute and it would have reached that base. One more minute of flight at 13,000 kilometers per hour, and it would have reached that base. Needless to say, the Ukrainian radars were unable to detect it. But NATO's early warning radars didn't see it coming either. Because it's impossible. It's impossible. You just have to look at the footage to see the speed. It's impossible. So this is very concerning. It's a major warning. I don't think this is the response to the attack on the presidential residence. I think the response to the issue with the ships, the piracy, will go in another direction, and it will come in due time. We'll see that one elsewhere. And as for the response to what happened in Venezuela, well, we'll see. Maybe China will have to step up more there because its interests are greater. After all, Russia had, well, just some outstanding accounts of about $10 billion. It's not a huge amount, and of course Venezuela will be able to pay it without any problem at some point. And these were the ones that were added. On the front lines keep advancing with Russian troops. Well, let's continue. What do I see in all this? Well, indeed, does anyone even remember the 28-point peace plan anymore? There's no outlook. I don't know. Maybe Trump will pull another plan out of his hat, or say that now yes or now no, who knows. Or that the Senate will impose 500% sanctions on countries that buy oil from Russia. In short, it's all this bunch of nonsense from a declining power.
En fin, es toda esta cantidad de mamarrachadas de una potencia en declive. Y sí, en declive. O sea, esto parece...
And yes, in decline. This seems hard to see after the issue of the military assault on Venezuela. A power in decline. This isn't my idea. It's the analysis made by analysts like John Mearsheimer and others from Offensive Realism, who are very clear about it. A rising power, a hegemonic power, has many cards to play to attract and in some way keep on its side the countries it's interested in. Diplomacy, business, trade, economic matters. In short, a whole range of options that are usually used for that purpose. When a power has to resort to brute force, to military aggression, it means it has no other options left. That's it. It's run out of cards.
Eso es que ya no le quedan más cartas. Y es lo que estamos viendo. Amenaza a todo el mundo.
And that's what we're seeing, threatening everyone. Trump threatens everyone. The drug cartels do the same. They end up threatening each other. That little jerk Peter Hesed, and I say it like that, because a guy who says the Russian defenses didn't work very well, they worked just fine for NATO yesterday with the Oreshnik. They worked perfectly. Come on, I'll show the footage again so everyone can see how well the Western defenses worked. I mean, really, you have to laugh at these kinds of people whose moral worth is zero, or maybe even below zero, but whose intellectual worth is truly ridiculous. They're utterly disposable, detestable characters.
Realmente desechables, o sea, detestables.
And, as for Greenland, and that's what we were talking about, there it is. Trump, who says that for him international law doesn't exist, that he can respect it only as long as he's the referee who decides when it affects the United States. In other words, international law is for everyone else, not for them. And in the face of all this, what more do European citizens have to see? How much more do European and American citizens have to suffer before realizing the true nature of the conflict? We can't keep being at the mercy of a madman surrounded by a gang of criminals. And whoever doesn't see it, listen, it's because they're either stupid, and as we know, that's nature's way. The number of fools is always growing, both in quantity and intensity, or they're a sellout and a traitor. And any government worthy of a sovereign country, especially those that claim to be more or less revolutionary, has no choice in a situation like the one we're living through, but to eliminate those treacherous sellout forces. Otherwise, there will always be the traitor who sells you out and stabs you in the back. There will be those who are well paid to stir up opposition, to create riots and commit outrages, so that it looks like the government is on the brink of collapse, just as it is happening in Iran. All lies, fine, but that's the work done by reactionary, counter-revolutionary, and unpatriotic forces. And they exist in Europe. For the most part, they're in governments. For the most part, they belong to the political, economic, and media elite, but also, in some cases, in those groups that call themselves the opposition and pretend to be very patriotic. And deep down, they're unpatriotic. Deep down, they're traitors to the nation. Deep down, they're forces to be eliminated. And I say it in every sense of the word, to be eliminated because the homeland stands above them, and they are going to stab the nation in the back. And I say it clearly. Mrs. Meloni, for example. Mrs. Meloni. What has Mrs. Meloni done? Among other things, she voted for the Mercosur Pact, which sinks European agriculture, just as an example. Or going around kissing the ground where that madman Trump walks, for instance. Lady Aspen, not to mention others. The Spanish right, for example. I'm not sure there's any other right-wing faction in all of Europe more unpatriotic and treacherous than the Spanish one. Mr. Abascal, the people from Vox, the homeland, Hispanic identity, the Ibrosphere, and yet some of them, even some wretches, and you have to be truly vile, have gone so far as to ask Trump to do something like that here in Spain too. pointing toward the Moncloa Palace.
Que aquí también en España haría falta algo así, ¿no? Y señalando el Palacio de la Moncloa. Y a ver, no seré yo quien vaya a salir en
And look,
Pedro Sánchez.
I won't be the one to come out in defense of Pedro Sanchez. I can criticize him for a million things. I think he's a disaster. For the nation, I think he's a disaster. And also very dishonest, right? I mean, we've already caught him making exceptions in trade agreements with Israel on arms deals through Airbus, or caught him sending Navy ships to assist the American deployment in the North Atlantic. But still, even so, it's the responsibility of the Spanish people to remove him or keep him. What is not their responsibility, and what cannot be justified, is bombing Madrid to kidnap the president of the Spanish government, whether it's Sanchez or anyone else. And this is what we have. 20 homelands everywhere, traitors in abundance, people who can't withstand a $10,000 shot.
Gente que no resiste un disparo de $10,000. Eso es lo que tenemos. Y podemos citar ejemplos. Mira,
That's what we have. And we can cite examples, but there's no need to go to the big political offices. Here in Spain, in the city of Burgos, there's a miserable, treacherous, unpatriotic city council that, breaking the law, decided to remove from a private residential building a banner that said something as simple as, "We don't want to pay or die for Ukraine." It seems that this city council from the Popular Party, a party of 20 homelands, the American Party, believes that Spaniards do have to pay and die for Ukraine. This is the kind of people who abound across Europe. And as long as European citizens don't understand that the entire structure, that whole parasitic, freeloading class serving the ruling elites must be torn down, there will be no solution.
Al servicio de las élites dominantes, no hay solución. Y viviremos ahora, en estos momentos, de
And now we'll live in these times from one shock to another, because we've ended up with a madman in the White House. But watch out, tomorrow the madman might leave, and others will come. And the same old traitors, the same old sellouts, will keep serving that other one. Because they don't serve the nation, they serve those ruling elites. And those ruling elites don't care whether they put one puppet or another in the White House. It could be a narcissist with a clearly evident delusion and disorder like Trump, or it could be someone else. For 4 years they had a poor man who no longer had the mental capacity to run the country and who used an electronic pen for signatures. Where is the power? Where is the power? So that's the situation we've started the year with.
Así que ese es el panorama con el cual hemos empezado el año.
Juan Antonio, los traidores a la patria no
Juan Antonio, traitors to the homeland are not only proliferating in Spain, but unfortunately in America as well. In Argentina, well, not only among ordinary people, but even within the government. And here's an example of a Venezuelan traitor to the homeland, now in Uruguay. The Venezuelan opposition in Uruguay has been saying these things a few days ago about the US attack on Venezuela, which has already left more than 100 dead. Attention. Yes, the price we have. One moment over here now. This lady, a few days ago, a Venezuelan in Uruguay, was interviewed by Uruguayan television.
Reporteada, entrevistada por la televisión uruguaya.
Well, now, yes, the price we all have to pay as Venezuelans is our oil. Yes, but maybe we'll be much better off, you know? So, yes, now maybe a lot of people will die, or not, hopefully not, but it's the price that has to be paid. And sometimes, have you heard that, Juan Antonio?
¿Escuchado eso, Juan Antonio?
Una patriota.
A patriot. A patriot. Oh, when patriotism becomes the last refuge of scoundrels. That's how it is. Yes, no, no.
Es así. Sí, no, no.
Van a morir muchos.
Many Venezuelans are going to die. Well, no problem. We'll hand over the oil, but we'll have Coca-Cola.
Claro.
Qué bien, qué bien.
Vamos a estar mejor. La dignidad, ¿qué es eso?
Of course. How nice. We're going to be better off.
Una cosa medieval.
Dignity. What's that? Honor. Something, I don't know. I mean, a medieval thing, that idea of honor. Well, these are the characters, and watch out, deep down, that's the great Achilles heel of all this. Because if there were a conscious people, they don't need to have great ideological training, simply aware of a few things like duty to the homeland and its protection, independence, sovereignty, freedom, these things wouldn't be tolerated. That lady, I imagine she's in Uruguay. I hope she never returns to Venezuela. I hope she doesn't come back, because if she does, I think Venezuelans need to be clear that that lady is a traitor. That lady shares responsibility for more than 100 deaths in the attack carried out the other day by the United States against Venezuela. Because, beyond and regardless of what the Venezuelan government is like, of whether you like Nicolás Maduro or not, and all that kind of thing, there's the country's sovereignty. Do you know what your homeland is? But how can you allow someone to come and impose themselves on you and steal your resources? What is this? And we still have to listen to these fools say these things. Well, there's also been a washed-up director of a media outlet here who talked about the crimes Maduro has committed against human rights and all that. Yeah, well, they're not in the Southern District of New York's indictment to convict Maduro. But they love to talk big. Why? Well, because they parrot like cockatoos the propaganda that comes to them from the antennas of the propaganda services of North American imperialism and the vile, parasitic elites. That's it. They just repeat it. Well, they're right-wing. Or they're also, look, with the issue of Venezuela, I think there's a particular kind of shared aversion. I don't know why. It really surprises me. It surprises me. Well, yes, I can say this. There are liberal, conservative, and other kinds of people here who can share the same aversion to Cuba or Nicaragua, since those are countries that are ideologically opposed to them. But against Venezuela, there's an African hatred, meaning an irrational hatred. Let's see, what has Venezuela ever done to us? What has Venezuela ever done to us? I don't know. Let's see. Let me remind you of something. At a certain point, Spain's main shipbuilding company, Navantia, managed to emerge from a major crisis that was about to shut down its shipyards. Because Commander Hugo Chavez ordered 3 F-100 class frigates, which provided the company with work and a lot of money for a long time so it could survive. And thanks to that, it stayed afloat and didn't close.
The same thing in Argentina, Juan Antonio, with Argentine companies. The same with Sancor, one of the main milk producers. And the national government did the same, with a bailout from the Venezuelan government at the time. They don't remember that. Juan Antonio, a few specific questions about the situation. Here, for example, Trump, in an unfortunate interview yesterday on Fox, made various statements about different things.
Con distintas declaraciones sobre distintas cosas. Aquí la primera, atención.
Here comes the first one. Pay attention.
Call you after this tanker was seized?
Did Vladimir call you after the seizure or the hijacking of the oil tanker?
I'm not going to say Russian, but the fact is that there was a Russian submarine and a destroyer nearby, and they left.
Y se fueron, se replegaron cuando llegamos nosotros y tomamos.
They pulled back when we arrived and took the ship. And their oil, by the way, is just another lie. No submarine, no Russian ship, nothing. This guy lies when he wakes up, lies when he goes to bed, and lies all day long. I think he even lies in his sleep. It's a lie. What ship? What submarine? What proof is he going to show for any of that? Has he said anything? Where? Where? Come on, what ship? I mean, anyone can see right now where the different fleets' various bases are. There's a website that explains it clearly. That's how we know the number of vessels that were in the Caribbean for the supposed assault on Venezuela. What is this guy talking about? He's an idiot. He's an idiot, like when he said, I sent a nuclear submarine near Russia, as if you sent half a dozen. You're a clown. Seriously, you're a clown. Everything he says is a lie. He doesn't say a single damn truth. Lie after lie.
Por cierto, Juan Antonio, esta es la imagen del petrolero.
By the way, Juan Antonio, this is the image of the oil tanker shortly before the hijacking. You can clearly see the ship's waterline, painted black when it's loaded. In this case, the ship appeared empty, which is why you can see the entire lower part of the hull. It was empty.
Debido a que el buque vacío.
Posiblemente, no lo sé, posiblemente el barco puede...
Possibly, I don't know. Possibly the ship was carrying compounds needed for refining Venezuelan oil. We know that Venezuelan oil has a very high density and needs additives in order to be refined. So the ship went there, unloaded, and came back empty. Because let's see, I'll say it again. Who would Venezuelan oil be sent to? Russia or China? China maybe. But is it going to Russia to deliver Venezuelan oil? No, that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, what does Trump care? He just blurts out his nonsense, and that's it.
Segundo elemento, Juan Antonio, para el análisis.
Second element, Juan Antonio, for the analysis and as a starting point for the next question.
And we are going to start now hitting land.
Destruimos el 97,8%.
We destroy 97.8% of the drugs that arrive by sea, and now we're going to start tackling the arrival of drugs by land.
The cartels are running Mexico. It's very...
Con respecto a los cárteles
Regarding the cartels rule Mexico.
That country, but the cartels are running and they're killing.
It's very sad to see what's happening to that country.
Los carteles gobiernan México.
The cartels rule Mexico. 230,000 people die in our country every year because of drugs.
Or a parent. I mean, parents are dying too with drugs.
Los padres pierden a sus hijos, los hijos a sus padres. Es devastador.
Parents lose their children. Children lose their parents. It's devastating to see the state of our families as a result of drugs. And, sorry, at another time, you said we're going to start attacking drug cartels on the ground in Mexico. How likely is such madness, Juan Antonio?
¿Cuán probable una locura de este tipo, Juan Antonio?
Dos cosas. Él dice que el 97,8% de la...
Two things. He says that 97.8% of the drugs come in by sea. I don't know, maybe it's 97.7, maybe who knows. The margin of error is about 0.1. It's obvious he hasn't done his calculations. So there are only two options. Either he made it up, or some intellectual beggar like Peter Hessel whispered it in his ear. 97.8% of the drugs come in by sea. Maybe, since very little drug trafficking actually enters the United States by sea. Drugs come in, yes, through the Mexican border, and above all, through the Canadian border. But this is stated in the DEA's own reports. This man just makes things up all the time. So, are you telling me that by bombing 6 little boats that don't even have the range to reach Florida from the coast of Venezuela, he's reduced drug inflow to the United States by 97.8%? Come on. Who is he trying to fool?
Pero bueno, ¿a quién quiere engañar? ¿A quién quiere engañar? Si es que además ya no nos...
Who are they trying to fool? I mean, they don't fool us anymore. Let's see, the United States has been lying since it came into existence, right? Let me recall the issue of the Maine in 1898 when they declared war on Spain. They've been lying since their very beginning. It's a country built on lies. That's why President Putin called it the Empire of Lies. So built on lies and lies and more lies, we end up with yet another lie. I mean, it's very sad that 230,000 people die every year in the United States because of drugs. But come on, if the drugs are being distributed there, sold there, laundered there, what are you doing, Mr. Trump? You're doing nothing. Nothing at all. Because obviously you're not going to do anything against your friends on Wall Street, since it's in the banks where drug money gets laundered.
Que es en los bancos donde se blanquea el dinero de la droga. Él, en el fondo, desde que es presidente...
Deep down, ever since he became president of the United States, he's been complicit in all of that, in the deaths of those 230,000 people, because he hasn't been able to stop the distribution, the sale, or the laundering. And then he brings up that little topic again. It was already a lie with Venezuela. In fact, they've had to admit that the cartel of the Suns doesn't exist, as acknowledged by the U.S. Department of Justice. In other words, we already knew it was a lie. We knew that. It was the narrative used to justify their atrocities and their crimes.
Justificar sus barbaridades y sus crímenes. Entonces, ahora, como el invento.
So now, since the invention has worked, that is, there are idiots who actually believed it, there are all kinds of media figures, quite a few in Spain, well-known ones, who believe this little story and repeat it, putting it on their channels as if those of us who read it were all idiots for believing such nonsense. Well, now they're doing it against Mexico. Are there drug cartels in Mexico? Yes. And then what are they going to do? A military intervention in Mexico? For what purpose? Just like in Venezuela, it was supposedly a fight against drugs to seize their oil. Here it's going to be about kicking China out, taking control of manufacturing, installing a puppet government, and putting an end to aid to Cuba. Maybe that's the point of eliminating the drug cartels. And besides, the Mexican government would have to authorize this, right? Because Mexico is a sovereign country, a member of the United Nations, and also has a free trade agreement. What is Mexico going to do? In fact, what is Mexico going to do in the face of these threats? I don't know. What really surprises me about all this, honestly, is that a meeting of the Organization of American States doesn't say, look, first we expel the United States from the organization, and then we break off all diplomatic relations. You can't have diplomatic relations with a madman surrounded by a criminal gang. Well, this is another threat, but he's threatened Petro the same way, hasn't he?
Well, regarding how drugs enter the United States, at least in the case of cocaine, the drugs enter the US through the noses of Americans themselves. And on this topic, Fox host Jesse Waters asked this question to Vice President J.D. Vance.
Pregunta al vicepresidente J.D. Vance. Atención.
Because they are. Yeah.
How do you
Attention.
win the war on drugs if Americans love cocaine?
¿Cómo le ganamos la guerra?
How can we win the war on drugs if Americans love cocaine?
Les encanta la cocaína.
That's the one big pushback I've gotten.
Well, of course, look, it's really sad. The drugs arrive, the rich folks in Beverly Hills, in Los Angeles, buy them. So how are we going to stop? Let's be honest. How are we going to win the war on drugs?
That's the case, Juan Antonio, with cocaine, the drug of the wealthy. For the poor, fentanyl and crack are the drugs that directly determine their death.
And that it doesn't come from Venezuela or Colombia or Ecuador or Mexico.
And at a much lower price. Regarding the entry of the drug, pay attention to this. There's a bit of irony too, and some video edits made by someone out there. But Marco Rubio's intervention was quite clear.
I thought you were introducing yourself.
Well, don't worry about that.
Went, I think, 4 hours, so we got at least 3 hours. And he said he was willing to end the war in Ukraine. I bet you he didn't do it in Spanish.
And he said he was willing to end the war in Ukraine. I hope he didn't say it in Spanish. He can't slow down for even a second.
I believe the Sky News reporter referenced civilizational.
For someone familiar with people who use cocaine, all the gestures, all the body language, all the acceleration of a person who takes cocaine are present in the fluid frame. The micro-gestures of the mouth. All of them, all of them, all of them.
Todas.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, at this point still... Look, I tell people, honestly, the problem isn't some blonde drug lord. The problem isn't Donald Trump, who's crazy. The problem is us, that we put up with this, that we tolerate it. That's the problem. The problem is that we don't force our government to say enough, that's it, it's over. Here in Spain, there are 3 bases. Out, come on out of here. In Italy, there are, I don't know, half a dozen out. I mean, it's really us who are, in some way, allowing all of this.
Estamos, de alguna forma, permitiendo todo esto. Que no, a ver, que de verdad, que allí en
No, come on, really. Over there in Washington, they're very worried, because things aren't going well. Because look, take the case of Venezuela. Some people say, and rightly so, but why does the United States want the oil? And it's true. Nowadays, as of today, they don't actually need the oil. Well, it's about stealing something you can then sell and make money from. That's for the oil company buddies, who have already met today against... fine, but that wouldn't justify everything else. No. Taking control of the oil is, first, about pushing China out of the Western Hemisphere.
Es uno, quitar a China del hemisferio occidental, es decir, echar a China. Dos, tener una palanca.
That is, to kick China out. Second, to have leverage over oil prices, to prevent them from rising too much or falling too much and benefiting hostile competing countries, as they say, or from dropping so low that it endangers the American industry itself, the fracking one. But above all, it's about controlling the sale of oil in dollars. Because the general trend, for quite some time now, has been that more and more commodities, more energy, more products, more metals are being sold internationally while bypassing the dollar. And of course, that really is the Achilles heel of that superpower, the master of the world, and all that nonsense one has to listen to. That's the problem. The problem is that, in the medium term, the United States knows it will have to rely on oil, Venezuelan oil, and oil from other places. Because fracking deposits don't last as long as the typical oil reserves we're used to. And therefore they'll start running out much sooner. And it's going to need oil. And they're going to need more energy because of the whole issue of artificial intelligence development and so on. Of course, they're going to need it in the medium term. In the short or medium term, we're talking about 5, 6, 8, 10 years. I don't know. But it could be around that. But today, the problem is that there are countries already selling oil to China in yuan, not in dollars. And then what happens? If the dollar isn't used, countries don't demand as many dollars. They don't buy as many dollars. So then, how is the debt going to be paid? Not the debt itself, but the interest on the debt, which this year amounts to $1.47 trillion that will come out of the U.S. budget just to pay the interest. That's why oil is needed right now. That's why it has to be taken. In other words, telling Venezuela, no, yes, you're going to sell the oil, you're going to make money, but under my control, so that it has to be paid in dollars. So that anyone who wants Venezuelan oil has to pay for it in dollars. That's the issue. And today it's about oil. Tomorrow it will be rare earths in Greenland, and the day after tomorrow it will be something else. Moreover, and this is another message to all the patriots of Ojalá, to those, in fact, if tomorrow, precisely because of national security concerns, once the Western Hemisphere is under control, the madman, because this is the geopolitics of the madman and his criminal gang decide that, for national security, the Atlantic must be controlled from north to south. Well, once Greenland is under control, what could Iceland do at that point? Wouldn't Iceland be in danger? And in the Atlantic, the Azores, which belong to Portugal, the Canary Islands, which belong to Spain, and the Falkland Islands in the south. Does Argentina plan to recover the Falklands?
¿Piensa Argentina recuperar las Malvinas? ¿Puede permitirse España perder las Islas Canarias?
Can Spain afford to lose the Canary Islands, or Portugal, the Azores, or maybe let them swallow up Iceland too? Because after all, it's right next to Greenland. This is the path we're on. So patriots, come on. Where are the PP patriots? The mayor of Burgos. Where is the mayor of Burgos? That patriot. Hey, she and her children aren't going to enlist to the Ukrainian call. So where are they? Of course, in the end you ask yourself, what are the control points of the Atlantic? Because even if you control Venezuela, the sea routes remain open. Chinese ships can still reach through the Pacific route to Peru and through the Atlantic route to Brazil.
La ruta del Pacífico hacia Perú y por la ruta del Atlántico hacia Brasil. Es decir, no te quitas a China de encima tan fácilmente.
I mean, you don't get rid of China that easily. So maybe they decide, of course, you have to control the Atlantic, and they call it the Trump Ocean. The Trump Ocean, they control the Falklands, they control the Azores, they control the Canaries, and they control Iceland. How lovely, right? Come on, let's see Europeans. What now? All of you. So what are you going to do? Where's Mrs. Callas? Where's Mrs. Callas, who's got us all worried here? I mean, what a bunch of ridiculous people. What a bunch of cowards. What a gang of thieves, of corrupts. I'm running out of adjectives. And there are others I can't say because they'll shut down my channel.
Juan Antonio,
Juan Antonio, about Venezuela and Venezuelan oil. Just imagine, very recently, just a few hours ago, the arrival of a diplomatic contingent from the United States, an American diplomatic contingent in Caracas, on its way to the US Embassy with the goal of reopening it and resuming negotiations on oil with the Venezuelan government. That convoy of cars there, with the diplomatic authorities. Meanwhile, this just minutes ago, Trump, at the White House, meeting with oil executives, saying the following just a few minutes ago.
All the business people gathered here will be major participants in the resurrection of Venezuela, generating great profits for their companies.
And also great wealth for the American people.
And so, great profits for the American people as well, and tremendous profits for the companies that choose to take part. And if you don't want to participate, let me know, because I have another 25 people who would love to be sitting here in your places right now.
Willing to take your place. So I just want to thank, these are people that
I want to thank you all. You're people I know, or that I know from reading business magazines.
These are the greatest oil people anywhere in the world.
And these are the major oil tycoons of the world. Well, let's see. Juan Antonio, very briefly. The American journalist Seymour Hersh presented, just as you did, Juan Antonio, the same line of interpretation. This idea of why RT wants to highlight the hidden target behind the US attack on Venezuela, according to Seymour Hersh. The American journalist argues that Iran could become the next target. In his new article published on Thursday, Hersh states that Washington wanted not only to overthrow the Venezuelan leader, but also to push China, America's economic rival, away from its ongoing purchases of cheap, heavy crude. By the way, be careful with the following. The United States, although it currently has an energy surplus, and even though fracking, the extraction of shale oil, shows a downward trend, does not seem to be in need of oil at the moment. But its refineries, built years ago, are basically designed to refine heavy crude, which in the past came from Venezuela and Canada. Now, they're facing problems because US fracking produces very light oil. So this is also about US oil, in addition to China's slowdown, and it serves as a warning to Brazil, Mexico, and others.
Además, no sirve para generar gasoil. El problema del petróleo de fracking.
Moreover, it's not useful for producing gasoline. The problem with fracking oil is that, of course, it's not suitable for everything. It's oil, after all, extracted from the ground through explosions. It's an oil that doesn't have the quality usually found in Venezuelan or Middle Eastern oil. That's just how it is. Or Nigerian oil, too. And watch out, Nigeria. Remember, it's been bombed, and there are promises to bomb it more. That's right, because they kill Christians, unlike in Syria, where Christians live wonderfully.
Will Trump really be able to reach an agreement with Venezuela, with the consent of the Venezuelans, of China, the main buyer of its oil, and of Russia? This plan, apparently in development and clearly not very well thought out before, do you think it can actually achieve that goal, Juan Antonio, or not?
¿Materializar ese objetivo, Juan Antonio, en tu opinión, o no?
Hay varias cosas a decir. Mira, primero, referirme a la reunión esta que
There are several things to say. First, let me refer to the meeting you mentioned. The effects could be seen there, sitting at the forefront of the proletariat. There are the people who, are looking out for the well-being of the people. They're all gathered. But despite all that, they're business people, and what they want is to make money. And the issue of Venezuela isn't as clear as you might think. Getting Venezuela's productive capacity back up and running to go from the 500,000 barrels per day it produces now to the more than 3 million barrels per day it once produced will require investing between $80 and $120 billion by 2030.
Entre 80 y 120 mil millones de dólares. Y otros 60 mil millones más en los siguientes.
And another 60 billion more in the following years. All for oil that right now, on the market, is between $50 and $60 a barrel. The numbers don't add up. It's quite possible that many of these oil companies will say, look, this is going to cost me money, or I won't see a return on this investment until 2040. So we're already talking about a time frame that in the modern economy is a long one. Anything could happen between now and 2040. I mean, seeing how we're starting off in 2026, it's hard to imagine what 2040 will look like. Then on top of that, there are a number of other things to take into account.
Hay que entender otra serie de cosas. La política de Trump puede cambiar perfectamente.
Trump's policy could easily change by Trump himself before his presidency ends, or simply in the next term if there's another president. And making that kind of investment is very risky. Then there's the technical complexity. That is, on top of everything, we have to add that Venezuelan oil does indeed need diluents. It's very heavy. And that adds costs and logistical complexity, because those diluents have to be brought in from elsewhere. And we'd also have to see what the legal framework is for doing all this. Because, of course, this idea of Venezuelan oil is mine and I'll do whatever I want with it, we'll have to see how that turns out. Let's see how this ends with the Venezuelan government itself. What has it said so far? Because it's so deceitful, so dishonest, so false, that it ends up selling us the same thing twice. It says it has already secured from the Venezuelan government the delivery of between 30 and 50 million barrels a year to the United States. If you take, let's say, the higher figure, 50 million barrels a year, divided by 365 days, you get roughly, anyone can check it with a calculator, about 150,000 barrels a day, which is exactly what Chevron was already buying from Venezuela. In other words, it's selling us something that already existed, something that was already there. But of course, it's normal. People don't pay attention to these figures or the accounts to realize they're being deceived. That all of this is really the work of con artists and nothing more. What could happen? That they actually manage to convince other American companies in the sector and end up investing in Venezuela to extract more oil. Fine, they'll be able to extract more oil, modernize facilities, and so on, which are obviously in very poor condition due to the sanctions and the U.S. blockade, you see. And in that way, they'll increase production, maybe instead of going from 500,000 to 1.5 million, right? Fine, and all that in exchange for some investments and the recovery of those investments there in the long term. Well, maybe, in exchange for other things, who knows? He might manage to convince those business people to do that kind of thing. Maybe those business people feel somehow obligated or pressured to do it. And also the Venezuelan government itself. Let's see how it ends up responding. But what's certain is that what he wants is for, if production reaches 1.5 or 2 million barrels a day, it to be sold in dollars, and not to China. In other words, He doesn't want the Chinese to handle it. He wants it sold in dollars. Of course, the problem is that if you suddenly put an extra 1.5 million barrels a day on the market, keep in mind that right now oil prices, OPEC Plus more or less balances them out with increases or reductions of 500,000 barrels a day, 700,000 barrels a day. If you try to put in 1.5 million or 2 million barrels a day right now, you're going to cause a drop in prices. And if that price drop doesn't suit Russia very well, though it has some leeway, right? It might not suit other Middle Eastern countries either, even if they still have some margin. But let's see if that margin can be sustained by the fracking industry. So let's see if what they gain on one side, they end up losing on the other. In other words, that issue isn't clear, nor is it really clear what direction the current Venezuelan government is going to take. Naturally, there are many interpretations here, and I don't want to get into that right now, but let's assume it acts independently. It must be said that until 2019, the Venezuelan government, under Nicolás Maduro, was establishing trade relations with oil companies, including the so-called Spanish one, Repsol. It was only after the sanctions and everything else that only Chevron remained, because it had special authorization from the U.S. government to allow that heavy crude to reach the United States. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had it. And Chevron was extracting 150,000 barrels of Venezuelan heavy crude every day. That's the damn reality, so draw your own conclusions, right? Anyway, he's linking it there to the oil companies. And if he doesn't have 25 more, and if those 25 fail, he'll have 50 more. That's what they're going to hit Trump with.
Come on, for God's sake. Yes. The question stems from the fact that lately all these American businesses, or all these interventions with the goal, or at least the promise of generating hefty profits, end up creating for the United States far more problems and losses than profits themselves. Do you remember, Juan Antonio, the grand agreements over Ukraine's minerals and rare earths? All of that is now in Russia's hands. You'll also recall the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Today, roughly 70% of Iraq's oil production is in the hands of Chinese companies, naturally through a joint venture with Iraq's state-owned enterprises.
Lógicamente, en una empresa mixta con las empresas estatales iraquíes, ellos no revisaron la privatización.
They didn't review the privatization of state-owned companies, and the state company takes part in extraction along with foreign companies. 70% of them are Chinese. In Venezuela, until recently, 80% of oil production was sold to China as a result of the hostile policy toward Venezuela, before Chavez traded oil with the United States. Of course, there's a very strong presence, a lot of improvisation in the United States.
No, it's the natural dynamic of a declining power. That is, when we say it has no cards left except brute force. Brute force implies that the other countries that feel threatened will try to increase their relative power by joining together. What happened the other day in Caracas is another push toward not only economic, political, and diplomatic rapprochement, but also military cooperation among the powers that feel threatened. What's strange is that right now they're not sitting together discussing all this, Petro with Lula, with the lady from Mexico, which would be the normal thing. In other words, we're moving toward collective defense. We're moving toward collective defense, and that's what this is going to cause. Therefore, before we can reach a multipolar world, given the attitude the United States has taken, we will necessarily first move into a bipolar phase. That is, the United States on one side and the bloc of others who will have to coordinate to confront the United States. And this will happen. Sooner or later, it will happen. Until now, they've tried to hide it under the appearance that, well, Trump, after all, wanted to negotiate with Putin, and that in some way, we existed in a kind of tripolar world, right? That is, with China, Russia, and the United States. Once this path has been taken, that will no longer be possible. That will no longer be possible. The alliance between Russia and China, and with other actors, will necessarily grow stronger. But this is already a matter of survival. There are no political or ideological issues here. It's purely a question of survival in the face of a global and nuclear power, the leading power, led by a madman surrounded by a criminal gang. What are the others going to do? They'll have to try to coordinate and unite. And this should also serve as a warning to Russia. Scott Ritter explained it very well. Moscow cannot agree to sign any treaty with these people. No, because it's a lie. Because they won't honor it. Because they don't respect the law of the sea. They don't respect international law. They don't respect anything. Nothing. So, what's the point of signing anything with them?
Con lo cual, ¿de qué sirve firmar nada con ellos? Rusia tiene que ir a
Russia must meet its objectives and further increase its relative power by reaching strategic agreements, including mutual defense pacts with China, India, Iran, North Korea, the Central Asian countries, Vietnam, and anyone willing to stand up. It cannot be trusted. No matter how much Mr. Dmitriev, who heads the Russian Sovereign Fund, thinks business can be done with the West. And maybe there are the usual oligarchs in Russia who believe that, well, this would be good because it's business. Of course, think about it. If there's investment from Western countries or the United States in mining in some republic of the Russian Federation, look, that's not the way to go. That's not the way to go. These people respect nothing. These people are a danger in themselves.
Esta gente no respeta nada. Esta gente es un peligro per se. Y hay que dejarlos caer. Hay que dejarlos que colapsen.
And we have to let them fall. We have to let them collapse. We have to manage the escalation, manage the process, in such a way that we suffer as little damage as possible, and they end up collapsing. Nothing can be negotiated. Nothing can be signed with these people. Look, there's less than a month left. Less than a month before the Strategic Arms Treaty expires. 2 or 3 months ago, President Putin already told Trump that on his part, while a new one was being negotiated, the treaty could be extended for another year. That would give time to negotiate another treaty. This delimitation of strategic weapons. They haven't responded. Trump hasn't responded. No one in the White House has responded. And it's going to expire in less than a month now. This is what we're up against.
Es decir, es contra lo que estamos viendo, un loco rodeado de una banda criminal.
A madman surrounded by a criminal gang. What's going to happen after February 6? Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen. A new arms race will begin. A race for strategic nuclear weapons. And where it was previously limited to about 1,400 or 1,700 nuclear weapons activated by each side, since the treaty will no longer be in force, what will happen? Since there will no longer be control over the weapons the other side has, and one might try to gain a strategic advantage, a race will begin for each side to have more weapons, and will end up again with each side having around 12,000 or 18,000 nuclear warheads, as happened in the worst moments of the Cold War. That's the issue. Well, then he hasn't answered. The gentleman hasn't answered because he's waiting for the Nobel Peace Prize, for his Oscar in Hollywood, and for his own delusional nonsense typical of a narcissistic madman with a personality disorder. I repeat, American Psychiatric Association, a moral cretin, a pathological liar, a friend of Epstein, the friend of Epstein, let's remember, the friend of Epstein. I mean, what kind of people are we dealing with? What kind of people are we dealing with? Is it really worth signing anything with these people? Is that what's happening? I mean, Mr. Sanchez, Pedro Sanchez, does he really feel like taking a picture with Donald Trump? Or with the people around him? Really? No, what we need to do is cut ties, get away from them. Let them forget about us, and if they do forget us, then we'll have to be ready to defend ourselves. That's how it is.
Así de claro.
Juan Antonio, la última.
Juan Antonio, one last thing. Speaking of the collapse of the United States, here we have some footage, courtesy of our sister channel on Telegram, Wars and Geopolitics. Many thanks for this presentation. Interview. Here's the report featuring a young woman taking part in a protest against the US attacks on Venezuela. These are her words, and pay attention in the background to the patrol car, the police truck parked there.
This isn't just a foreign problem. It's our tax dollars that are also being used to commit these war crimes. It's also our responsibility as the people to stand against the Trump regime, the Trump administration, which is committing crimes both here in the United States and against the people of Venezuela.
Now, in the background of this interview, you can see that
police car. And right here, we're showing you the video we have. Just after the interview ended, Pliszta was arrested by 2 Grand Rapids police officers. You can see it in the video. An officer tells Pliszta that she's being arrested for obstructing a public roadway and for failing to obey a lawful order from a police officer. You can see them putting her into that car. She had been spreading several messages calling for the United States to free Maduro. But again, she was detained.
Wanting the U.S. to free Maduro, but again, she was taken.
Well, let's not be surprised. Any day now, in Burgos, the lady mayor might order someone's arrest for making statements she doesn't like in the main square. Honestly, how many more images like this will we have to show before the president reacts?
These arrests today by Bortak are not only illegal, but also very little known. You can see them beating up a poor girl. There's the Bortak police, the border police, acting without the right to make arrests. And now they're carrying out arrests all over the country, completely illegally. Because they can't. Legally, they can't. This is a police force meant for the borders, and specialized, naturally, in special operations. Well, now they're detaining protesters all across the United States. How plausible is that? Here, by the way, more protests after the killing of a mother of 3 children, one of them very young, who was fleeing from ICE, the deportation police, not because they wanted to deport her, but simply because of this woman's fear. They riddled her with bullets. There are protests now all over the United States because of this situation. And here, this girl named Renee Good, or Buena.
No KKK, no racism in the United States.
How plausible is an internal collapse? And how much of this latest acceleration in politics? Suddenly, well, actually nothing sudden about it. Trump's blatant imperialism started quite a while ago, but apparently now it seems to have sped up over time. How much of this is a response to the internal situation, to the upcoming midterm elections? What's your analysis of the internal situation in the United States, Juan Antonio?
Obviously, everything has an influence. Trump, I think somehow, I'm not sure he really understands the internal reality of the United States. Since he only listens to those who whisper to him, to the group he's got around him, I don't know to what extent he's aware or not. That is, judging by his level of rationality and mental balance, I think he understands very little. But he's on a path that could indeed lead to him, in 9 or 10 months, losing the elections, losing Congress, losing the Senate, becoming a lame duck, and American politics becoming even more erratic. Because, of course, he's going to try to keep governing through decrees or executive orders, the kind of decrees he issues without going through the chambers. And logically, I imagine that with a Senate and a House of Representatives dominated by the Democrats, they'll try to stop him, as they've just tried to do in the Senate, to prevent him from launching new attacks on Venezuela. Of course, they did it after the first attack. They could have done it earlier, which also leads one to think how deceitful they are and how sold out the Democratic representatives are in the great American democracy.
En la gran democracia americana. Pero efectivamente, primero que.
But indeed, first of all, the economy is not going to move forward through militarization. He wants to increase the defense budget by 50%. I'm telling you right now that unless they start printing money like crazy, and that would mean increasing the debt again and reaching 40 trillion, they won't be able to do it. Without printing money, they won't be able to. So it's just another fantasy of the madman, another fantasy of the madman. But all of this, in some way, everything we're seeing, Gaza, the lack of foreign intervention, the issue of Venezuela, the actions of the police or these police groups in the streets, social inequality, and so on, is gradually undermining social cohesion and the very voter base of Trump and the Republican Party. Right now, I don't have any polls. I don't know if any have been conducted or not. But I get the feeling that at this moment, Trump has already lost the midterm elections. So then what's he going to do? Logically, the Democrats aren't idiots. They're going to start stirring things up as much as they can. Let's imagine that in March there's a court hearing for Nicolas Maduro in the Southern District of New York. I don't know which charges the judge will ultimately accept, because of course, if the one about being the head of the cartel of the Suns has already been dropped, and there's another one about trying to buy machine guns as a head of state. I mean, come on. In a country where any fool can walk into a gun shop and buy a machine gun, it just sounds so ridiculous, honestly. So while I don't know which charges will remain in the end, but let's imagine for a moment that indeed the judge, if he doesn't stage a farce, which is possible, might have to release Nicolas Maduro, even if it's on bail. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine it? Besides, the defense attorney, who's Julian Assange's lawyer, is going to start making a big case saying, no, first of all, a head of state has immunity, legal immunity, especially under the laws of other countries. Protected by international law, by the United Nations Charter, by the Rome Treaty, he has immunity. On what basis have you detained a head of state without even issuing an international arrest warrant? You really have to listen to people like Alfonso Rojo, I'll say his name because he deserves it, talking about the atrocities committed by Nicolas Maduro. The other day, Trump said he had killed millions of people. And in the end, what do we have in the Southern District Court of New York? And in the end, what if he's released in accordance with U.S. law itself and the Rome Treaty, because he has the immunity that every head of state has? What would happen if then in March something like that occurred, that the Democrats said, now let's go after Trump? What would happen in the current elections, 5 months later or 6 months later? It's heading in a very bad direction, And I get the feeling that to avoid decline, the one we talked about earlier, that of the United States, its downfall, maybe Trump was the last chance if we had found an intelligent, calm, and reasonable guy, not a madman. Why? Because if the Democrats come back, they'll just keep doing the same as always.
Porque si vuelven los demócratas, van a seguir lo de siempre. La financiarización, las finanzas, la especulación.
Financialization, finance, speculation, woke ideology, this and that. We're going to keep seeing the same thing, and the same imperialism, but with much less capacity for cohesion within American society, and for reversing a democratic situation they've reached, which would now be very hard to undo. And Trump was trying, bringing industries back, becoming a productive economy again. The American oligarchs don't care about that at all. What they want is to keep speculating and making money in their accounts. As a result, the United States will continue its decline, irremediably.
Quizás han perdido esta última oportunidad
Maybe they've lost this last chance because, of course, the master of the world, the fool of the hour and of the whole day, has led this to a dead end. In 9 or 10 months, it could turn into a full-blown defeat in the midterm elections. In fact, I'll be glad. I'll be glad, without a doubt. I'll be glad, and the faster the decline of the United States of America accelerates, the better. There will be no peace in the world as long as that state remains in the hands it's in, and with that conception of things, of manifest destiny, of the Monroe Doctrine, of being on the wrong side of history, and all those delusions with which they've been poisoning, through their entire leisure and communication industry, the rest of the world. No, man, no. They're not going to rewrite history. History is what it is. And I can already say you've been lying from the start. And as a Spaniard, since 1898, you lied. You didn't win the Second World War, man. No, man, no. Come on, conspiracy, man. Get off your high horse. Go on, have another one, my treat. Stop telling us nonsense already. And that's how it is. What's happening is that this is going to be, there are going to be birth pains, you know? There are going to be birth pains, because no one here is safe. No one is safe. Not Mexico, not Nicaragua, not Cuba, not Colombia, not Brazil, not Greenland, not Europe. Right now, no one is safe from the craziness of these people.
Y tampoco nosotros, Juan Antonio, como promotores del...
And neither do we, Juan Antonio, as promoters of critical geopolitical analysis. And partly for that reason, 9 days ago, at the start of the year, we launched our channel on Patreon, where we basically present what we can't show on YouTube due to censorship. We already did an analysis with Fernando Morrigan of the interview given by Sergei Karaganov to Glenn Dixon about the Russian nuclear doctrine, no less than that, with some truly very concerning statements from Karaganov. Also, in the latest broadcast, we did a very interesting analysis of a discussion, a debate, about the phases of Zionism and the current terminal phase of Zionism, with Jeffrey Sachs, Pascal Lothar, Manuel Ramos, and other experts and scholars dedicated to this topic. Based on that, we carried out a follow-up analysis. We already have more than 600 subscribers there. Really a lot of people, more and more. We're pleasantly surprised. Everyone is invited to subscribe to our channel on Patreon, where we present what we can't present here.
Podemos presentar por aquí. Seguramente Juan Antonio también participará de aquí a poco en alguna.
Surely, Juan Antonio will also soon take part in some reaction to something interesting and controversial that we can't present here. Juan Antonio, to wrap up, lately, in these past 9 days, there's been so much terrible, gloomy news that to close, we simply want to show something a little lighter, to come down a bit from all the madness. These are the sunflower fields on the banks of the Meghna River in Bangladesh. Originally planted for edible oil production, they've become a major tourist attraction that welcomes thousands of visitors. The owner of these fields, whom we interviewed at one point, how lovely, by the way, responds in the interview.
Qué bonitos, por cierto, responde en la entrevista. Inicialmente cultivábamos girasoles como cultivo para obtener semillas oleaginosas.
At first, we grew sunflowers to produce oilseeds. However, since then we've started growing them here as a tourist attraction. We've been much more successful as a tourist destination over the past 4 years. It's not common to see such a large sunflower garden in winter. Well, some of the lovely things in the world, despite how terrible everything is, the world still has beautiful places. Life is still worth living, despite it all. It's also largely our responsibility to create a world that's a little less unjust, a little better, so that we can witness more of these things, like these beautiful sunflowers, and fewer of the atrocities carried out by the shameless empire of Donald Trump.
El imperio descarado de Donald Trump.
Hombre, hay dos noticias positivas también. Sí, hombre.
Man, there are 2 positive pieces of news too. The company Bill Gates had created for artificial meat has gone bankrupt. It's gone bankrupt. And here in Spain, they had set up a big worm industry to make flour for eating. They even spent 200 million euros on it. That's gone bankrupt too. You see, sometimes, as that classic saying goes, people often vote with their feet or with their consumption. In other words, maybe they're showing us the way. I hope that's the direction everyone starts taking, becoming aware from the simplest things like food to the most complex like global geopolitics. Because if not, in the end, there's no future. We either fight for that future or it'll be taken from us, and it'll be taken by a madman surrounded by a gang of criminals.
Demolishers, thank you very much for joining us. To Beatriz Pulido, our moderator, as always, our heartfelt thanks. Juan Antonio, as always, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. A big hug, dear Juan Antonio.
See you soon. Best regards to everyone.